Complete this contract, and we'll leave our home for a new world of endless possibilities. A new frontier that awaits our discovery. Welcome to Talos-2, a dangerous planet full of catastrophes and the primary setting for Hyperdrive's new game, Arknights Endfield. Little information is provided regarding this seemingly hostile planet, but one thing is for certain. The lands are an unforgiving wilderness home to many dangers and relics of an ancient era. But what is Talos-2? I'm Dark Karma, and today we'll be focusing on what we can expect from this hostile planet. Besides being a new world, very little is known about where it is in the universe in relation to Terra, home of the main Arknight story. Some have theorized that Talos-2 is what lies in Terra beyond the continent we're familiar with, though this seems unlikely, as the website talks about the planet as though it were separate to any part of the setting we've seen so far in Arknights, going as far as to call it a new planet in the Wikipedia. Others have suggested that Talos-2 is a habitable moon orbiting Terra. So let's use our knowledge of cosmology, both in real life and in sci-fi, to determine where Talos-2 stands in the universe. First off, Talos-2 is not one of Terra's moons. How do I know? Because the website describes it as a planet. While this could be a mistranslation, I don't know if the Chinese word for planet is the same as moon, but I'm going to trust the company's localization team on this one. So, they say it's a planet. Planets can't be moons, and moons can't be planets. This is due to how celestial bodies are classified. A planet orbits a star, and a moon orbits a planet. It doesn't matter if that moon has an atmosphere, or is the size of a planet, or even capable of life. If it orbits a planet, it is a moon. Talos-2 is described as a planet, which means it must orbit a star, not another planet. We can also deduce at what position in the solar system Talos-2 is located due to its name. This is also because of celestial bodies and how they're labelled, and how solar systems are organised. First, you have a star. This will be the name for the system. For example, our sun is called Sol, so our solar system is the Sol system. If a solar system has multiple stars, they will all have the same name but have a letter assigned to them, such as Alpha Centauri A, Alpha Centauri B, and Alpha Centauri C. 3 stars in the same solar system. While some stars have their own names, they will still share the same label. For example, Alpha Centauri C is more commonly known as Proxima Centauri, and we typically just call Sol the Sun. Meanwhile, planets will, by default, keep the name of their parent star and then assign a number based on proximity to that star. Using our solar system as an example again, Mercury would be Sol 1, Venus would be Sol 2, and Earth is Sol 3, so on and so forth. The same applies to multiple stars in the system. The closest planet to Alpha Centauri A would be Alpha Centauri A1. Now, a slight caveat, this is actually a common misconception, mainly existing in fictional work. In reality, their planets are also assigned a letter, except it's a lowercase letter, and the first planet starts with the letter B. I imagine writers changed this because Alpha Centauri AB can be confused for the gap between the 2 stars in that system, known as Alpha Centauri AB. You can see how this would get a bit complicated if you're listening to it as opposed to reading it. In the very old system of naming, moons would actually be given a number, such as Jupiter's Galilean moons, the first 4, of which are labelled 1 to 4. But that's an old system not used now, and again, the website describes Talos-2 as a planet. So for now, I'm gonna go with somewhat fictional, but based on real nomenclature system as Hyperdrive's intention for the naming. So going by this, with Talos-2 having a 2 in the name, we can assume that means the planet is located in the second orbit around the star, much like Venus is in our solar system. So where is it in relation to Terra? Well, I think Terra and Talos-2 are in the same solar system. To be specific, I believe Terra would be Talos 3, the third planet orbiting the star, much like the very Earth that Terra is based on. The reason I believe this is that the few lore bits we do have mentioning the game talks about absolutely nothing to do with travel to Talos 2. The game is described as a space opera, yet there is no explanation of how they got there. No mention of advances in propulsion, no mention of faster than light travel, no discovery of a wormhole to another solar system, nothing. This leads me to believe that the method of transport to Talos 2 would be no different than how we would get to the moon or to Mars. There's no need to justify how people of Terra are able to get to another planet if there is nothing to justify. Alternatively, Talos could be a neighbouring star system like Alpha Centauri, and people could be travelling for decades, potentially centuries, either as part of a generational ship or in some form of stasis. However, I doubt this, partly because I think it would be mentioned, but also in a meta sense, I believe that Hyperdrive will want to eventually introduce some of our beloved characters from Arknights into Endfield as playable characters. This would mean that travel would need to be either fast or between a short distance. So let's assume that Talos 2 and Terra are both part of the Talos system. We know that Terra is pretty much as close to Earth as one can get without being Earth. So what about Talos 2? Well, again, not much detail is provided about the planet itself. But what we do know is that Talos 2 is tidally locked around its star. How do we know this? Well, it's in the description. But the vast wildlands and uninhabited territories stretching far beyond the colonies of the habitable band have yet to be surveyed. As such, most of this world remains untamed. Habitable band. This phrase is important. You see, tidal locking is when a body has the same rotational period as its orbital period. What this essentially means is that one face is always facing what is orbiting, while the other is always facing away. Our moon is tidally locked to Earth. The face of the moon we see at night is the same one every night. The dark side of the moon is not visible to us unless we literally travel to it. The same can happen to planets, where only one side is facing the star, and the other faces away. This causes a very harsh and unforgiving environment. The side facing the star experiences an eternal day in which the star is always shining. The temperature on this side of the planet is hellish, vast deserts, and a temperature far beyond anything we'd see on Earth. Meanwhile, on the other side of the planet is an eternal night. Light from the star never shines on this side of the planet, meaning even the temperature is always below zero. This side is a frozen wasteland, far colder than anything we would ever experience on Earth, ever. However, in between these two sides is a small band of twilight. Here, the temperature is not too hot, but it's not too cold either. If the planet is in the star's habitable zone and has the right conditions for life, this area would be the only place on a tidally locked planet that could be habitable. In other words, it's a habitable band around the planet. So I think Talos 2 is a tidally locked world in which the pioneers of Terra set up their colonies on the habitable area of the planet, which means that the desert wastelands we see in the images are on the side of the planet facing the star. Of course, these areas are most likely still relatively close to the habitable band. As the deeper into the hot zone you go, the more unlivable it would become. These wastelands are harsh, but they still seem to be livable. This also gives the possibility for further map expansions involving a frozen tundra on the other side of the habitable band. It would also explain why none of the desert locations seem to show at nighttime, although this could also be done for the sake of showing off the game, which is a lot harder to do if you don't have much light. So it could just be that the trailers are only showing during the day. But I do think that it's the tidally locked world. But what about the atmosphere? Well, considering the characters are able to walk around without a mask on, It's safe to assume the atmosphere is similar to Terra, which, for simplicity's sake, I will assume is the same as Earth. Given the plants forming on Talos-2, it's also safe to assume that there is nitrogen in the atmosphere too. So basically a nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere, possibly with some carbon dioxide too. However, I would like to suggest that there is more oxygen on Talos-2. The reason I say this is the size of the insects on the planet. In one trailer, you see a scorpion running around. It's pretty large. I certainly wouldn't want to see that in person. But why does this mean more oxygen, though? Well, because bug size is determined by oxygen supply. Bugs don't carry oxygen around their bodies like we do. Rather, they basically just absorb it. This means they can only really grow so big in our environment. The more oxygen in the atmosphere, the larger an insect can grow. Millions of years ago, this was actually a thing. There was a time when insects were absolutely massive, and it was due to the atmosphere having more oxygen at the time. However, fires would also be a lot more dangerous. However, I should caveat this by stating that there do seem to be some large landborne bugs on Terra too, such as the Originium slugs, though I'm unsure if this is due to the Originium, the Terran atmosphere also having higher levels of oxygen, or just differences in evolution compared to Earth. From the gameplay trailer, we can also deduce that Talos-2 has a gravity similar or the same as Earth, and presumably Terra. This leads me to believe that Talos-2 is similar in size and mass to that of Terra. There is a real-life similarity to this in the form of Earth and Venus. While Venus may seem like an absolute hellhole, that's only really due to its incredibly dense atmosphere and runaway greenhouse effect. Physically speaking, Earth and Venus are like twins. Venus is slightly smaller than Earth and assumes to have a slightly lower gravity, but overall, not by much. If it weren't for the hostile atmosphere, Venus could be perfectly livable and not as inconvenient as it would be to live on Mars with its much lower gravity. So this overall theory of Talos-2 and Terra really does mirror our real worlds of Earth and Venus. Maybe this is intentional, or perhaps it's just a happy coincidence between my theory and the limited information we have. Though with clear signs of liquid water, plant and animal life, Talos-2 can easily support human life. But did it ever support life before the Terran colonists? Welcome to Talos-2 and your new home at Endfield Industries. A new era of change has dawned upon this ancient world. Time to make your choice. Throughout Talos-2, you can find many abandoned industrial, scientific, and expeditional ruins. Many of these ruins I do suspect are more recent. The website's details does make it seem as though the colonization process of Talos-2 has been long and arduous, with many failed attempts. But there are also other aspects that lead me to believe there is a far more ancient existence. Recover lost technology and equipment. Exploring the old era will help rebuild civilization on Talos-2. Exploring the old era will help rebuild civilization on Talos-2, huh? Well, here's two possibilities. First one being that Terrans colonized Talos-2 long before the events of Endfield, but their attempts were ruined and Endfield is only the second attempt, sometime after the first failure. This would corroborate the seemingly less ancient ruins. However, I doubt this is the case, at least not when referring to the old era. Now, I think the old era is referring to the previous civilization on Terra. But Karma, you said Talos-2 is another planet. I did, and it is. But the previous civilization was incredibly advanced. One even capable of hyperspace travel. Also, side note, When I first read this bit of lore, I did wonder if Terrans reversed engineered the ancient hyperdrive technology. That would mean Talos-2 is actually in a different solar system to Terra. But again, nothing of the sort is mentioned in any of the info of the game. Hyperdrive technology is a massive deal. The single most important discovery a civilization could make if they want to survive beyond their home world. The fact that there's no mention of any advanced engineering or discoveries leading to the colonization of Talos-2 is why I believe Terran space travel is only interplanetary and not interstellar. This means it's entirely possible that the ancient civilization that died out on Terra is the same civilization on Talos-2, which also seemed to die out. But why? The previous civilization is thought to have been wiped out during what's known as the First Disaster. This civilization is said to have been destroyed by a threat from above. Many have taken this to assume that it was the arrival of Originium, which is also seen on Talos 2. And it very well could be the case that Originium did arrive at this time. However, I feel like a civilization as advanced as having hyperspace travel would have easily been able to cure or just flat out adapt to oropathy. I mean, we're talking about a civilization that could completely bend the rules of physics here. So I think something far more sinister came from the sky. In the trailers, you come across a new enemy, not seen on Terra, a seemingly mechanical, swarm-like entity called Agelos. They appear almost hive-like in its movements. These entities seem to be native to Talos-2, at least in the sense that they aren't seen on Terra. While the Agelos could have been left over from the previous civilization and either turned on them, or have just gone haywire in the centuries since, or maybe they are just doing what they're programmed to do, and it's just that what we're doing is against that programming. However, I don't think this is the case. I think these are alien in origin and the cause of the previous civilization's demise. I believe that the threat from the sky was something that discovered the previous civilization and sought to wipe them out, destroying them on any planet they inhabited. Eventually, the fake sky was made over Terra. It is said that the fake sky is the borderline that demarcated the previous and modern civilizations, as the former is described to be an era when the stars were still observable. Not much else is mentioned about the fake sky. However, given that the outside universe is unavailable to the people living in modern Terra, it must be a form of barrier. The problem is, I find it hard to see how the civilization could have successfully made a barrier to protect Terra, then still die out anyway. So I don't think the fake sky was made to keep the threat from the sky out. I think the fake sky was created to trap the few survivors who'd eventually result in the current civilization. So, let's say the previous civilization did something. They angered the Agelos, they spread too far, or maybe they just found themselves in the entity's radar, and that was enough to spell their doom. The entity annihilated them, pushing them back world by world until it was just Terra left. And once it was all said and done, the full sky was made so they could never spread from their home world ever again. The entities seen on Talos-2 are the remnants of that threat, either damaged, left behind after the destruction was over, or maybe they were just left to monitor the planets whose inhabitants they'd killed, to make sure they stay dead. However, at some point, Terrans had to have bypassed this fake sky. At some point in the future, the people of Arknights either remove this barrier or find a way to open and close it. If it was created to trap them in, then I assume the first option is the most likely. After all, why make a prison when the prisoners could figure out how to leave on their own? But if this is the case, then the people of both Talos-2 and Terra have now put themselves on the firing line, much like the previous civilization. They landed on Talos-2, struggled, survived, then stumbled across this ancient enemy. And inevitably reawakened it, and now that it's awake, it is aware of their presence once more. If this is the case, then perhaps the cinematic trailer introduced us to the game's main antagonist, an alien species responsible for the destruction of the previous highly advanced civilization that have since been dormant until one day the people of Terra step foot off their home world once again. Of course, this is all purely speculation, based on what little I know of ancient Terran history, and story-wise, I've only just finished Chapter 6, Partial Necrosis. This could be an entirely different enemy, or it might not be an enemy at all. After all, we don't see it actually attack anyone, it's just whizzing around. But until we get more information, that is the theory I have regarding the old era of Talos-2, and our strange mechanical friends. And last, but by no means least, we have, this. I... I don't know what this is. I'm honestly stumped. There's no real-world equivalent to this on Earth, or in the greater universe. It's just strange. I assume it's a barrier of what could be energy, or maybe some sort of exotic matter. The only thing I can equate this to is the barrier from the book and the movie Annihilation. In fact, the effect is almost identical, which makes sense. Both effects use an oil on water appearance, and oil on water is what makes that kind of iridescent glass or rainbow effect. In Annihilation, the barrier was called the Shimmer. It was an electromagnetic field which scrambled the DNA of every biological thing inside its area. Its general themes are inspired by the similar Lovecraft stories such as Color from Outer Space. However, I have no way of knowing if something similar is happening here at all. They visually look almost exactly the same, but this could be anything. It could be a portal, it could be a quarantine zone, it could be some kind of natural disaster native to Talos-2. It might not even be on Talos-2. It could be a living entity or some eldritch god. I honestly don't know. There is nothing on the website, and the trailer thing doesn't last long enough to show any real details. In conclusion, I believe Talos-2 is an Earth-like, tidally locked planet on the second orbit of its host star, and in the same solar system as Terra. I believe it has a similar atmosphere to Terra, and the same gravity. I believe that the desert wildlands we see is the half of the planet facing the star, and the habitable band is literally a band around the planet that has the right conditions for life to prosper. I believe that the previous civilization of Terra once inhabited this world and were driven off by the alien threat, an inorganic life form known as Agelos. I believe that eventually, in the future, presumably after the Arknights main story, the people of Terra figure out how to bypass the fake sky and make their way out into the stars, eventually colonizing Talos-2. I think they struggled to achieve this, and much like the colonization of the New World, many settlements rose up only to collapse and be abandoned in favour of safer areas, in this case the habitable bands around the planet, and possibly later, as part of Enfield's objectives, they recolonize these areas. I believe that the Agelos will be the principal antagonist, left over from the destruction of the previous civilization, and they have been reactivated by the people of Terra as they settle on the planet once more, and I believe that whatever the strange oil and water effect at the end of the trailer is, it's something eldritch, or some kind of quantum physics bending sci-fi phenomenon that I'd love to know more about someday. Maybe it could be a barrier to another dimension, but for now, that's it. Again, this is just me spitballing theories and headcanons based on some images, some tiny amounts of gameplay, and the little information we've been provided so far through the website and the wiki page. I, for one, am looking forward to more trailers, lore, announcements, and videos to come from Enfield. I would love to see what I got right, what I got wrong, and how my thoughts change regarding this fascinating yet ominous planet. If you have any theories of your own, be sure to leave them in the comments below. This theory is just based on my interpretation, so maybe you know something that I don't. Or have a different angle. I'd love to read it. And as always, if you enjoyed the video and want to see more, be sure to like and subscribe. It helps the channel grow and it lets me see if I'm on the right track regarding what videos to post. And of course, keep an eye out for my next video or livestream. But until then, I shall see you all next time. Bye bye.